So here at Catalyst, we're about one thing, and that is loving people to life change in Christ. That's right. So if you're here this morning, whether you're on campus or joining us online, we love you, but we love you enough to tell you the truth, which is we don't want you to be the same. We don't want you to stay the same as when you arrived. We want to daily become more like Jesus in the way we live. And one of the primary ways that we become more like Jesus is by studying his word together. So we're going to be continuing our teaching series, walking through the 10 Commandments. So I want to start by giving you the key thought. This is the key thought that sort of wraps all of these sermons together. The 10 Commandments are the life rules for God's people. Each reveals an area of life that we are to give to him. And remember, when you're coming to the 10 Commandments, you are coming to a set of laws that was written a super long time ago. So that's like a major theological term, super long time ago. So remember the difference between ancient law codes and contemporary law codes. Our modern law codes tell us what not to do. They outline that which is wrong. But ancient law codes, like the law of Hammurabi, ancient other codes, they outlined the right way to live. If you're thinking like old school Greek philosophy, they say, what is the good? Let's chase after the good. So an ancient law code doesn't just outline this is where things go bad. It also is intended to direct us towards things that are good. They're designed to direct life, not simply penalize crimes. Also, remember that the 10 Commandments divide into two sections. So the first 4 dictate our relationship with God. That's our vertical relationship with him. The latter 6 deal with our relationship with humanity, with other humans. So when you take the full 10 together, in the New Testament, when Jesus was asked what's the greatest commandment, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus was summarizing the 10 Commandments, and in doing so, really summarizing the whole of the law, that we have 2 primary relationships. We have our vertical relationship with God, and we have our horizontal relationship with everybody else in humanity. And these laws, these rules, are designed to help us live out both of those relationships, both vertically and horizontally. So today we are on the 6th commandment. So I'll go ahead and give you the text. It's from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 13. So while you're turning there, let's just review where we are in the Bible story. So the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, God creates the heavens and the earth. That's fantastic. Everybody's awake this morning. It's good. All y'all had your coffee before you came to church. Well played. So in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. He creates Adam and Eve. He places them in a garden at Eden. Then life is great until you get to chapter 3, and then we screw it up. Then there's sin. Then there's a fall. Then ultimately we fast forward. There's a flood. Keep going. God chooses a guy named Abram. He makes a nation. That nation grows. Abram has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, and that's the end of the book of Genesis. Open the book of Exodus. God's people are in Egypt. They're in slavery. God sends a redeemer to save them by the name of Moses. Moses floats down the river, is raised by his mother, then raised in the palace, ultimately delivers the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they leave Egypt and they go to the foot of Mount Sinai, and that's where we are in the Bible story. It's important that you follow along and see I like to think of them as mental mile markers. And if you follow the mental mile markers, it really helps to bring what the Bible says all into a much larger picture. So here we are, we're at the foot of Mount Sinai. The other thing I need you to remember, God spoke these first 10 commandments verbally. And we're used to seeing the picture, right, of Moses holding the 2 stone tablets. You know, he's doing the old school, just double bicep curls. He's holding on to those 2 big stone tablets. But before they were written in stone, they were spoken by God himself to the entire nation at the foot of Sinai. That's super important because then we can remember God's speaking to a nation, not just a person. He's speaking to all of his people when he said, don't have any other gods before me. He's speaking to all of his people when he said, don't misuse my name. Don't misuse my day. Honor your father and mother. Well, that's important that we just keep the collective. So hopefully that's giving you enough time. Today's text for a sermon is just Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. And here it is. It's going to be really simple. You shall not murder. You shall not murder. Now, one thing I need to make the point first is this. You can give that, Eric. I need you to all understand this. All murders are killings, but not all killings are murders. So as we delve into what does this commandment really mean, we have to be super clear about what it doesn't mean so that we can limit certain things from our scope of understanding and then drill deep on what it really means. So I want to go ahead and leave this on the screen for a minute. Just leave that. All murders are killings, but not all killings are murders. So here, let me explain why. Throughout the Old Testament, there are many different words used to describe murder, killing, death. We, in our modern day culture, have different words. In fact, I spoke to Gary, who's a homicide detective, right? So the word homicide oversees everything death-related that's not self-inflicted death. In English, what do we use? What's the word that describes self-inflicted death? Suicide. If it's not a suicide, it's automatically a homicide. But even under the category of homicide, there's different words. We've got murder, we've got manslaughter, got involuntary manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter. We come up with all of these different terms to describe different aspects of ending of life. Well, the Hebrew language is no different. There are certain words. For instance, if I were to use the word kill, I could be talking about the death of anything. When I put weed killer down on my lawn, it's intended to end life, but that doesn't mean it's intended to murder life. So when we talk about what is murder, and in a moment I'm going to give you what I believe is the most accurate biblical definition of murder. But the first thing I need you to understand is this. All murders are killings, but that doesn't mean all killings are murders. So when we look at this commandment and it says, thou shalt not murder, we must first understand what is a murder and also understand what's not a murder, because you will apply the Sixth Commandment, and it doesn't apply to killings, but it does apply to murders. So let me go ahead and give you two definitions, and I don't think I put these on the screen, so just flow with me here. What does it mean to kill? To kill means to end life. That can apply to any life. When I use weed killer in my yard, I like to end the life of the weeds that are messing up my lawn. My children love to pick up the dandelions and the little fluff balls, right, and blow them into the air because we like to watch all the. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's like 12 more weeds in my yard, right? So I want to go into the yard and I want to put down the weed killer because I would like those things to get killed. But would you say there and say, well, you're a weed murderer, right? No, even in our language today, you wouldn't use that word to describe that task. So to kill is to end a life. And that can be the life of a plant, that could be the life of an animal, or that could be the life of a person. So to kill is the overall ending of life. If I were to use our legal terminology, both homicide and suicide are in the category of killings. We then start determining, well, what was the cause, what was the victim, those kind of things. So to kill is to end a life. But to murder it adds something else here. So here's the best biblical definition I can offer you of murder. To murder is to unjustly end a human life. To unjustly end a human life. Now, why am I going to say that? Well, let me first show you in Scripture where I believe the definition of murder exists. So if you'll turn with me to the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 6. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. We're going to go to the very first moment in Scripture where one human causes the end of life of another human. Anybody want to guess what story we're going to? That's right, Cain and Abel. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. This is what the Lord says. He says, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. This is the most important verse when it comes to defining what is murder versus what is killing. Because Genesis chapter 9, verse 6 illustrates the principle that makes human beings different from every other form of life that exists on our planet. And that is simply this. All humans carry the image of God. I did not say all Christians carry the image of God. I said all humans. All humans, no matter what, no matter their gender, no matter their race, no matter their political ideology, no matter their country of origin, no matter their ethnicity, their hair color, their eye color, their taste in music. Obviously, guitar players, better humans than everyone else. I get that. But here in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, we get the foundation that all humans are made in the image of God. And because of that, here, when the very first human causes the death of the very first human, God establishes capital punishment, not because we killed life. Keep that in mind. This doesn't say, whoever sheds human blood shall their blood be shed because they ended life. That's not what it says. Can you put it back up on the screen for me for a second? I want you to look at the latter half of this sentence. For in the image of God has God made mankind. The reason murder is worse than killing is because you can only murder a human because only humans are made in the image of God. This is where we have to start with our theology and our understanding of what is a murder. Killing is me killing the weeds in my front yard. Killing is when a lion hunts for its food on the African savanna. We don't claim that the lion murders its prey, but it does kill its prey. Nobody blames the shark for needing to eat because it hunts, right? We even have a word for it. We call it hunting. We don't call it murdering. The lion doesn't murder, it hunts. The wolf doesn't murder, it hunts. The shark doesn't murder, it hunts. It's a predator. Why does it kill? It kills to eat, but it kills other animals. And I could go on and on. Spiders are predators. Foxes are predators. We understand that. But from a biblical perspective, I need you to understand, before we talk about what it means, do not murder, I need you to understand that you can only murder a human being. You can't murder a plant. You can't murder an animal. I mean, you can murder a song. Trust me. I've heard some people do that, okay? I'll just be honest, okay? The lifelong musician in me goes, man, that person just murdered the mess out of that track. Does everyone understand where I'm going? And do you see biblically and foundationally why I believe you can only murder a human being? Because only human beings carry, in Latin they call that the imago Dei. Every human being carries the image of God because it is in the image of God that human beings are made. Now, this gives us three key points to understanding what is murder and what is not murder. And the first is murder involves the human component. You can only murder human beings. Number two, murder involves a moral component. Notice that God implied a punishment because it's wrong. This is one of the foundational things. No matter what culture has existed, murder or the unjust ending of a human life has always been wrong. It's a universal standard no matter what culture. Now, different cultures may have warrior cultures, right? They may have warrior cultures where they pride themselves on their prowess in battle and being able to kill people on the battlefield. But murder involves the unjust ending of a human life. It is always morally wrong. And thirdly, moral involves an ethical component. It's always ethically wrong. Lions don't murder, but humans can. Lions don't murder, but humans can. The final thing I need you to understand today is we are going to look at several biblical justifications for the ending of a human life. Those biblical justifications exist outside of the do not murder. There are ways to end a human life that is just, and there are ways of ending a human life that is unjust. Unjust ending of a human life is murder. The just ending of a human life is not murder. Is everybody following me so far? I don't know if everybody expected to go to philosophy class for their sermon, but all I get to work with is thou shalt not murder. I got 4 words. So you got to work with me a little bit. So the first justification for the ending of a human life is not murder, capital punishment. Because I saw right here in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God, God has made mankind. God institutes capital punishment for the unjust ending of a human life. Most societies throughout history have upheld God's standard, that if you end a human life, it is considered a capital crime. In fact, here in America, I did a little deep dive. I wrote this sermon before I went on vacation, so I did a little deep dive on what can you be put to death for in America. Like what actual capital crimes have followed out. And I can tell you that at least in our country, in the few hundred years that we've been in existence, America has never executed someone for any crime other than an unjust ending of a human life. Now, if you happen to be committing a crime, say a bank robbery, and someone dies during the commission of that crime, that's felony murder. Your crime directly led to the unjust ending of a human life. But the Supreme Court ruled, and I want to say it's like, don't quote me, like late 70s, early 80s. The Supreme Court really dealt with this issue because there were a few other crimes that people were trying to argue should be of a capital offense. And the Supreme Court actually said that it's unconstitutional to use capital punishment for any crime that did not result in the unjust ending of a human life. So the Supreme Court backing up the book of Genesis here, that capital punishment is one form of ending of a human life that's not murder. The second one, self-defense. If someone is actively trying to take your life, and the only way for you to not die is to take their life, that is not murder. That is self-defense. Take a look at Exodus chapter 22. We're going to look at verses 2 and then the first half of 3. So this is Exodus 22, 2 and 3a. Here's what it says. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Okay, so take me back for a minute. So this is one of those super obscure verses that I'm super glad that God decided to put into the Bible. So let's look at the very beginning. So go back one slide for me. If a thief is caught breaking in at night, so you are in your home, Jesse, it's nighttime, Megan and the boys are all sleeping, and some cat gets kind of froggy and breaks into your house. Do you just let them wander around? I think I know Jesse pretty well. I don't know any man who, if they caught someone in their house at night while their wife and children were sleeping, that's just going to be like, oh yeah, take the TV. Here, I got keys to the car. You want that too? Notice that this is not a new issue. It's here in the Bible. It's all these years ago. If a thief is caught, now that's an operative word. It doesn't just mean you know who it is. It means you have caught them at night. And during your catching of them, you guys tussle, there's a fight, and you end up ending that person's life because they are in your home at night. If that thief is struck by a fatal blow, then the defender, in this, my example, Jesse's not guilty of murder because someone broke into his house at night, he defended his family, and they picked a fight with the wrong good-looking bald basketball coach. That's what they did. But no, I can't give you 2 without giving you the first part of 3 because it's totally unfair. Watch what happens here. But if it happens after sunrise, if what happens? See, that's this whole thing. If what happens? In my opinion, this is what he's saying. Because the previous verse said not only that the breaking in happened at night, but the catching of the person happened at night, right? Both of those are in the previous sentence. If a thief breaks in and is caught at night. So in my reading, that means the breaking in happened at night, the capturing of the person happened at night. And then somehow that person is let go and you chase him down the next day. You chase him down the next day and kill him, it's murder. Jesse, if that person had broken into your home while your wife and boys were asleep, and you threatened them well enough that they were super scared of Coach Jesse, and they left, and then you're like, you know what? I've thought about it. I've slept a little bit. I've had some coffee. I don't think I'm going to give that person a chance to break into my house again. And then you go hunt that guy down. That's murder. Because at that point, and even in our legal system, you can no longer argue self-defense. I let that person leave. They left my house. They went to their house. You can't go hunt them down. At that point, that's revenge. So do you see the difference? The Bible clearly gives a justification that self-defense is not murder, but revenge is 100% still murder. All right? So, capital punishment is not murder. Self-defense is not murder. This next one's going to upset you, so put your seatbelts on. Here we go. Justified war. Just war or justified war is not murder. Take a look at Exodus chapter 17, verse 9. Exodus chapter 17, verse 9. This is Moses speaking directly to Joshua. Here he says, Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So this is that super famous Bible story where Joshua's down in the valley and he's fighting, and Moses and Aaron and I think Hur are standing here and they're holding up the staff. And as long as Moses keeps the staff elevated, Joshua is victorious. When his arms get tired and Moses lowers the staff, Joshua begins to lose. So they get Moses a chair, they put him on a rock, and his two friends help him hold the staff until he's victorious. Now, the concept of a just war is a super debatable issue. I don't want you to sit here and think that just because there is an issue of justified war in the Bible, that means every single war is justified. No, you could go back to Plato, Aristotle, even Thomas Aquinas. Fast forward to World War II with Churchill. They constantly debated what is or is not a just reason to go to war. I don't have the time to do a massive deep dive on that issue for you, but I will tell you that is a very debatable issue. And even in our country, in the halls of Congress, that's why the president can't declare war by himself. Congress also has to sign off on it because they need to debate this issue of is sending American lives and troops into war, is this justified versus unjustified? So I do want you to see that just war is a valid reason for ending a human life that is not murder, but the question of whether the war is justified would still be right. How do I know that? Because we could look at the Nuremberg trials that happened after World War II. We tried war criminals. And somebody will say, well, they were just following orders. At a certain point, your human moral compass needs to understand that what you were doing was still murder. And that's what Nuremberg taught the world. Just because you are a soldier in the service doesn't necessarily mean that you get a free pass just because somebody with a higher rank than you ordered you to do stuff that's wrong. Doesn't mean that there may not be consequences. So I don't want to super deep dive the just war issue, but I do want you to know it's debatable, and if you'd like to talk to me at a further depth about that issue after church, just let me know. So capital punishment is not murder. Self-defense is not murder. Justified war is not murder. Why? Why is God so specific about what is just and what is unjust ending of a human life? Here's why I think. The prohibition against murder is to guard the sanctity of human life because all humans are made in the image of God. See, all that works together. If every single human is made in the image of God, and you will lose your life if you unjustly take another human life. 1 + 2 = 3. What do we get out of that? That human life is intrinsically valuable. And that's why this commandment is necessary. Just like don't misuse my name, right? You have to look at the negative, but by installing the negative, what's the positive that it puts in? I don't know about you, but one of my favorite books growing up was The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas. Made it into, I don't know if you like the Disney movie that had Chris O'Donnell in it. That was a decent remake of it. Tim Curry was a fantastic villain. There's a quote from the original book that said, and I forget which musketeers were talking to which, but just pretend I was brilliant and I remembered. But there's two guys and they're having a conversation, and in their day and age, they fought with swords, not with guns. And one of them says to the other, every time I draw my sword, I think not about what I'm killing, but what I'm defending, what I'm allowing to live by choosing to use lethal force. That idea, brilliant idea, I'm super glad that they added it, but that idea needs to be applied here. Why do we use, because you would say if the ending of human life is murder, then that means all capital punishment is murder. That means all self-defense is murder. That means all justified war is murder, and that can't work. So that you got to have that word unjust in there. The unjust ending of a human life. Okay, so all of that was the setup. Now let's go back and look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. You shall not murder. Here's what's super cool, right? It's 4 words in English. It's only 2 words in Hebrew. I get 2 words for your sermon today. It literally is no murder. There's no verb. It just says no murder. In fact, the next one's going to say no adultery. The next one's going to say no stealing. They're all 2-word commandments. That's why defining murder first is super important, because if you don't understand that murder is the unjust ending of a human life, then you don't know how to avoid that. So the hyper-literal translation is no murder. We, as God's people, we are forbidden from unjustly ending human lives. Why are we forbidden from that? Because all humans are made in the image of God, which means all human life is intrinsically valuable, which means that's why murder's wrong. You tracking with me so far? Right? All humans are made in the image of God. That is why murder is wrong. So what does this look like today? I would submit to you that the definition of murder should not change. The unjust ending of human life. Now, in the New Testament upholds government's right to oversee capital punishment. The New Testament has, in fact, Jesus himself said, don't fear the government. I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it exactly, but he said, don't fear the government who is able to kill the body, fear God who is able to kill the body and the soul, right? So there is such a thing as the government's ability to still use capital punishment. There is still today such a thing as self-defense, and we could, while we're having barbecue today, have the super fun conversation about what is or is not justified for war. Those things still exist today because the definition of murder still exists today. The unjust ending of a human life. So let me spell it for you out. Oh, there's one more justified ending of a human life. The wages of sin is the very first instance of death in the Bible is when Adam and Eve left the garden. God said, don't eat of this tree, for if you do, you will surely die. The 4th justification for the ending of a human life is judgment of sin. But you and I as humans do not carry the authority to do that. Who is the only person who is fully just and right to judge the sin of another human being? God himself. So, from a human standard, there are 3 exceptions to the murder rule. For God himself, there's one additional. The wages of sin is death. But since you and I don't really get those choices, that's why I didn't want to put it too far up front. I just need you to understand that there is a 4th justification for the ending of a human life in a biblical context, and that is the judgment of sin is punishable by death. So what does that mean? For you and I today, murder is still murder. Manslaughter is still murder. Homicide is still murder. Suicide is still murder. And abortion is still murder. Now, I've upset half of you. Now I'm really going to upset the other half. There is a biblically justifiable reason for abortion. I'm going to say that sentence again just to make sure everybody heard it right. There is one biblically justifiable reason for abortion. And this is what it is. What's the definition of murder? The unjust ending of human life. There is one exception to where abortion's not murder. If a woman is experiencing an ectopic pregnancy, and to carry the pregnancy to full term would equal the death of the mother and the child. 2 deaths are more morally reprehensible than 1 death. Does that make sense? If you have the choice to save the mother's life or force the mother to follow a pregnancy that will end in her death and the death of her child, 2 deaths is more morally wrong than 1 death. So by choosing to end an ectopic pregnancy, you are ending a human life. Don't get it wrong, you're ending a human life. But that's why that word unjust has got to be up front. The unjust ending of a human life. If you unjustly end the mother's life because the pregnancy will kill her anyways. And I know that's a super sticky thing, so now I just ruffled everybody's feathers. But I'm in the middle of a commandment. I'm not going to back down from its modern day applications. If the situation requires the ending of one human life for the direct saving of the second human life, that is morally responsible. To force a woman to carry a pregnancy that will end her life and the baby's life, that's the ending of two lives. Aborting the pregnancy to save the mother's life only ends one life. You've got to choose life. Does that make sense? So, all of those are murder, but here's the bigger point. Why is this commandment so valuable? And here's the thing that I hope that I can get across. Murder is the unjust ending of a human life because all humans are intrinsically valuable. This is a foundational principle of a biblical worldview. And this is why it's so important that we talk about what is a biblical worldview in church. Because for the atheist friends out there, the atheist friends have no justification for why human life is important. So let's just follow down the atheistic story for a minute. 13 point whatever billion years ago, stuff appeared out of nowhere that they still don't have an explanation for. And then that stuff eventually coalesced into a planet. Then that stuff eventually coalesced into the building blocks of life. Then that stuff eventually got the right kind of spark and the right kind of atmosphere, and it turned into the first living cell. And then given enough time, that first living cell became more and more complicated to the point that it evolved into human beings. So what is a human being in an atheistic worldview? A human being is nothing more than a highly evolved cellular creature. Human beings are no more valuable than plants or animals or amoebas. Because if all a human being is the end, and actually I wouldn't even say the end. For an atheist, you have no right to know that a human being is the end of the evolutionary scale. It's just where we are in the timeline. If it's 13 billion years in the past, and there's another 13 whatever billion years in the future, then Rob, you and I are just apes in comparison to whatever humanity is going to be a billion years from now. We have no intrinsic value if all we are evolved cellular creatures. Thankfully, the biblical worldview says, what is a human? A human is a special creation made in the very image of the Almighty Creator. Amen. If we give up Genesis 1 through 3, we give up why people are valuable. We give up why human life is sacred. I can't do that. I can't just stand with the people who want to say, Genesis 1 through 11, it's history or it's mythology, or now somebody's come out with the term mytho-history, so we can try to use both at the same time. I can't do it. I will stand here and tell you unashamedly, I believe every single human life is intrinsically valuable, is sacred, is deserving, and automatically should have certain human rights. Life is where that right has to begin. All humans deserve the right to life. All humans deserve the right to freedom. All humans deserve the right to justice. These are foundational elements of the biblical worldview that we can't give away. And they're all built into the simple two-word sentence, no murder. But we had to define what is murder in order to get there. Why are we as God's people stricken from the unjust ending of a human life? Because the person to your right and the person to your left, the person in front of you and the person who's watching us online, intrinsically within their DNA is the very fingerprints of God. And you and I do not have the right to wipe away those fingerprints. You and I are not high-ranking enough. We are not important enough. We are not self-sanctified enough to erase the fingerprints of God from any human life. And that includes all of the people who don't go to church. That includes all the people who worship other gods. That includes all the people who look different than you, who vote different than you, who smell different than you, who like different music than you do, who go to different churches or practice different religions. Every single lost person who is bound for hell carries the image of God. That's why the gospel is important. I don't want to see any image bearers die without knowing that their Savior is where they got their image from. I want them to find the fingerprints of God inside their own self, inside of our own moral compass. Why is it that all of humans think murder is wrong? Every single human culture from all of existence has always said murder is wrong. Why? Because that's part of the fingerprint that God has put on every one of our hearts. Why is it that we natively understand that human beings are valuable and important and that no one should be forced to do something against their own conscience? Because the fingerprint of God on our heart says that all humans are intrinsically valuable. That's why murder is wrong, and that's what it means. So I'm sure some of you came to church today, you did your homework, and you understood that thou shalt not murder means don't murder. And you're like, wow, I haven't done that one, so I guess today's sermon's going to be pretty easy. No. Congratulations, you're not a murderer. If you are a murderer, please let me know on your Connect card, and you and Gary and I can have an appointment after church. Right? Okay, so that was the warm-up. Here's the pitch. Ready? Just because you've never unjustly ended a human life doesn't mean you actually live like every human life is valuable. Just because you have not been the cause of the ending of a human life doesn't mean that you live like every single human life carries the image of God. That's who we should be. That's what this commandment should be driving us towards. It's not just oh look, murder's bad, let's not do that. No, the reason murder is bad is because all of these people are made in the image of God. And we should love them, regardless of whether they know Jesus or not yet. Regardless of, whether they get their hair done by Jen or not yet. Right? I'm trying to make it light because I know this is a super heavy topic. And I know culturally, and here's the other thing I understand. I know culturally, the application of this commandment is not popular. But if I back down from its implications, then I've got God to answer to. And no offense, but he's like way scarier. So here, let me give you the takeaway. Here's how we're going to bring this in for a landing. Just because you're not a murderer doesn't mean you're off the hook. Here's your takeaway. Understanding God forbids murder grounds the value of human life in the Christian worldview. Do not murder is why we can ground human life is intrinsically valuable. Every human life, every person you pass while you're driving on the road who can't remember how to use a turn signal, they're still made in the image of God. Right? They might be pressing my image of God pretty hard. But every single person is still made in the image of God. And that is why we must be a church that always has open doors. We must be a church that always has open arms. Because no matter how lost, no matter how far, no matter how confused, no matter how argumentative someone may be, if they are a human, they carry the fingerprints of God on their DNA. We are not just in ending their life. We are just in saving their soul. And that's who we should be as a church.